Welcome everyone to the Ken Hill Podcast. I'm Ken Hill. My goal with the podcast is to share the techniques and habits of what the best motorcycle riders in the world do to thrive and survive in a sport that has consequences. Using my 20 plus years of riding and training at the highest levels, I want to make these techniques and habits accessible to every rider in the world. The podcast structure is deliberate. I don't have sponsors. The duration relative to many other podcasts is short, making it simple to listen multiple times, and I only release a new podcast when I feel I have something to share. I'm not cranking out podcasts because my sponsors say I need to. You listeners are my sponsors, and I appreciate the donations, which can be made via the podcast page on my website, khcoaching.com. And now, here's today's episode. Welcome to the Ken Hill Podcast. I'm your host, Ken Hill, and this is podcast number 85. This is a topic that I'm just super passionate about. What does it take to make a MOTOAMERICA grid? And I'm passionate about this topic for a lot of reasons. And this is a topic that I get a lot of people asking about. And I've been fortunate enough to work with 2 or 3 different clients over the years that has been their goal. It's like, okay, great. I want to make an AMA or MOTOAMERICA grid, right? I want to be able to qualify and to be able to race. And it has honestly just been an honor to be able to work with some of these people to be able to meet literally a lifelong goal. And I kind of had the same goal. I did it very late in life. I didn't do my first AMA pro race until age 41. And I mean, when you think about it, right, that's sort of it's a huge goal, which is, what is the highest level of racing we have in America? And that's MOTOAMERICA. So what does it take to make the grid? So let's, we're going to dive into a lot of it, because it's not just, hey, I'm fast. I should be able to make the grid. No problem, right? I'm fast, so I should be good to go. And yes, rider performance is what ultimately gets you in the show. But more than that, I see a lot of the frustrations of getting into a MOTOAMERICA, which is anything but the riding. So there's a lot of factors just to be able to get an entry. So first thing is, the people at MOTOAMERICA, honestly, they're great, and they want you to succeed. And you're going to think, well, gosh, I've talked to some of them, and God, they make it really difficult. Well, yeah, it's a professional organization. They're representing professional motorcycle racing in the United States, and they have rules and regulations, absolutely. But they will do their best to help and guide you through to get into the show. They're great. They're fantastic people if you just get to know them a little bit and realize what they're up against. So don't be afraid to email them and ask questions. And they have just a massive amount of great resources, which we'll get into, which is on their website. So, all right, we're going to get into what it takes to make a MOTOAMERICA show, and there's definitely a lot to it. So, all right, here we go. So you decided to make the plunge into getting into a MOTOAMERICA race, which I absolutely applaud you for doing. It's one of the hardest things that you'll ever do. It's also one of the most rewarding things you'll ever do. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking about trying a MOTOAMERICA race, good on you. I think that's awesome, and it's honestly what's going to help keep growing our sport here in the U.S. So there's a lot to this podcast. So hang in there, and we're going to kind of branch a lot of things. So getting into a MOTOAMERICA race, the first thing is obviously your riding and your speed. And we'll talk about that. But there's so many more things that people don't look at, and typically they look at doing it very, very late into the process. So there's licensing. There's the the entry procedure, getting into the venue and setting up and getting your headshots done, and everything runs off a schedule, which is getting into the event, tech, tires, the riders meeting, track familiarization, each one of your sessions, parc fermé, tech, starting all these different things have schedules, and a lot of times, and amateur racing, it's just much more flexible, rather than the very high standards and organization that they have at a MOTOAMERICA event. And yeah, at first it might seem a little strict, and it can even be a little bit off-putting, but it's there for a reason, right? Everybody has to be treated the same as best as possible. And I mean, because they'll certainly understand where you're coming from, and there's definitely some give and take. So, but they do have high standards they need to maintain. It's a professional sporting event, right? So not only is it a professional sporting event, it's televised. So yes, it has a strict schedule with strict standards. So let's get into each one of these things and find out what it's going to take for you to get into the show. And the first barrier, which I think is incredibly important, because this is ultimately what gets you into the show, is, are you fast enough to qualify? And to qualify, depending on the class, you need to be within 108 to 110% of the fastest time, or the pole time. In super sport and super bike, it's 108%, and all the other classes, so twins, stock 1000, baggers, it's all 110%. And to be clear, this isn't easy. When you look at, I mean, to make a super sport or super bike grid, holy crap, it's no joke, right? It is no joke fast. So let's dive into some of these things and figuring out what it's going to take to get into the show. And we're going to start off with the qualifying and a little bit on your riding. And your local club sort of race time is a point of reference, but it's not always the best reference. And unless you're already running a MOTOAMERICA spec bike with spec tires, spec fuel, then it really isn't an accurate point of reference. So I see so many riders think they're in, but they run a different tire brand, they run different fuel, or they have a different engine configuration for say their club. And all of these things have to be taken into consideration. If you're new to Dunlops or the MGP fuel, and you've never run Dunlops, or your bike's not mapped appropriately, this is something that you're going to have to run and be comfortable with, because we'll talk about the time factor in just a minute. So I think a really good barometer of this is, think about when you want to race. And typically the easiest thing, of course, is doing it at your home track, which we'll talk about. But if you're going to do it, make sure that you're on the equipment that you're going to race MOTOAMERICA with. So running the tires, running the fuel, having the bike at a spec. And that is where a true comparison, right? A true reference of lap time comes from. So when we get to a MOTOAMERICA race, and again, there's different aspects of this, but there's no time. There's no time. And for a person that doesn't do the series or isn't riding at the very sharp end of the level, basically not a professional motorcycle racer, then we want to make sure that we're ready to go right in FP1, that we're able to meet the qualifying times right in FP1, because there is no time. And you're not in a position to try completely new fundamentals. You're just trying to take the fundamentals that you have and put them in a very pressure-oriented environment. So the goal is is that we'd love to see you make, a Q time in FP1 right out of the gate. And the other thing that you have to look at is a lot of times, whatever pole time that you sort of did your point of reference is, a lot of times it's going to be faster. So you have to give yourself some margin there. And, margin, I would say, a half a second to a second is what would be awesome. But sometimes it doesn't quite work out that way. We've seen, especially this last year, we saw a lot quicker times than we had in some of the races. And for 2022, some of the classes are going to be getting new rules where the times are going to be a little bit quicker. So you have to take these things into consideration. So when it comes to your qualifying, make sure you're on, when you're using that as a point of reference, make sure you're using the correct equipment and make sure that you've got yourself a little bit of cushion on that qualifying time, because again, at the event, there's no time. You've got to be able to hit the ground running. All right. Before we started to get into some of the logistics, we'll kind of dovetail into that here with, you're going to need lots of help. A minimum of one person to help you, but ideally it's a 3-to-1 ratio, 3 people helping one rider. And it seems like that might be a lot, but there's no time. And you'll be busy just trying to ride. And that's the whole idea, is putting you in a position to be just the rider. And there's so much to do, which we'll dive into, but that's the idea. And of course, you can get it done with less than that, but ideally having that, two helpers, or even 3 helpers, just will make your life so much easier. There's tires, right? There's setting up your hot pit and getting help, establishing what their roles are, so everybody's not tripping over each other. So again, you can just be the rider is so important. And you have to think about what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to compete with the best riders in the US, and it takes just being that to be able to make it. And yeah, I get it. A lot of the MOTOAMERICA weekends are hurry up and wait. It's you do your thing and then you sit around for a while. That's providing everything's ready to go. And it can be that way, but that's a great problem. So, all right, let's get back to a little bit of the non-rider stuff. So there's a lot behind the scenes that it takes to get into the show and to be at the show. And it starts with the MOTOAMERICA website. And the MOTOAMERICA website's great. It has everything you need to know. And I really encourage you to jump on the MOTOAMERICA registration. You can just Google MOTOAMERICA registration, MOTOAMERICA competitor, and it has everything in there. They're very good about putting up the schedules. The rule book is on there. Updates are typically on there in a fairly timely time. And all the contact is on there as well. So the first step is get on the MOTOAMERICA website, read everything twice. Getting your MOTOAMERICA license is also not necessarily easy. They have strict qualifications for it based on your points in your club and whether your club is AMA sanctioned or not. So make sure you take the time to see if you can qualify via their point system to get your MOTOAMERICA license. So, it sort of starts with that. And it's not a slam dunk getting a license. So make sure you, again, get in there and read about that. Once you get your license and you get entered, the event really starts on Thursday, meaning that setup day is typically the busiest day, and Fridays are also very, very busy. But yeah, the Thursday is just crazy. If you're coming in and you're new to it, they have you park outside the venue, and they bring you in tiers. They have a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and you get let in sort of based on where you're at in the system. So typically, as a privateer, you're going to be last, and so it's a freak out where you may not get parked till 2 o'clock, and your tech window opens up at 2:30. So yeah, it's what I've said before, right? You have to be, once the trailer door or the RV door comes down with your bike, it needs to be good to go. And we'll talk about that just in a second. So yeah, the event starts on Thursday, and it starts with going over to registration, getting your stuff from them, and then really it's getting your pit set up as basically as possible, so you can function, and then having your windows of everything open to you or available to you. So there's a windows for tech for your class. There's windows for your tires. Hot pit assignments don't come out till a little bit later. Track familiarizations at a certain time. So all of these are done in the event schedule. And the event schedule you can look at ahead of time and make sure that you have it ready. So once you get in, get some partially set up, and get to your tech window. Tech takes 2 or 3 people. Of course, we need to bring your bike over there. Belly pan's got to be off. And they're going to inspect your bike to make sure that it's basically safe and has all the basic requirements needed for racing for MOTOAMERICA. So, the belly pan's got to be off. It's got to have a rain plug. It has to have a working rain light. Just all those things. Basic safety wire. They're less stringent than you would see in a club because they expect you to be a professional about it. You have to bring your gear. Your gear has to have the right patches and has to have the right logos, and has to be in good condition. And another part of this is your team. You have to have team gear. So your team gear has certain standards, and having the right credentials is a big deal. So this goes back to when you enter. One of the biggest things that I see is not having the correct credentials and taking too long to get credentials. Please take the time to get your credentials way ahead of time with all the people that you want. Once you do it, it's actually very easy once you're at the event, but please make sure that you get that done. So yeah, tech, they're just gonna look over some basic things and make sure your bike looks like it's legal for the class. Basic things depending on the class, right? Wheels, brake master cylinder, little things like that. And then looking at your tire window. So you'll get a list of the tire compounds for that race event, and they differ. Some weekends have a wide range of tires for the rear, some have a narrow range. Other classes, even Junior Cup might have only one set of compound tires for the weekend. So looking at what your tire compounds are. So get your tires over to the tire vendor and get that done. And then once that happens, track walk typically happens late in the afternoon, and getting the track familiarization done. If possible, it's really beneficial to have some of your other team members, if they haven't ridden at that track, to do the track familiarization with you. So when you chat with them about what's going on, they at least have some idea of what's going on. So the overall goal on Thursday is to be complete. So the only thing you have to do on Friday is plug your tire warmers in. You've already procured your gas. That's something to do as well, is ordering your gas ahead of time and picking up your gas and having the spec fuel with you. If you've run other brands of fuel, if they do decide to do a fuel check, which we'll talk about, your tank will be contaminated. So it either has to be flushed out multiple times with the spec fuel or a different gas tank. So getting your fuel order ahead of time and make sure your bike is capable of passing fuel check is super, super important. So again, once you have the schedule of when you're going to be out, depending on what class you're in, things can move very, very quickly, or they can move very, very slowly. Again, it just really depends on the class. FP1, so free practice 1, should be a real good indicator of where you're at. And I suggest running typically the hardest rear tire so you can stay out pretty much the entire session, maybe come in, take a breather and go back out, but not having to change a rear tire. It's just typically you can go really well and the track may not be up to spec yet, so the track might be a little bit green, so it's better to save it because going back to the tire deal is depending on what class you're in, you're limited on tires. You don't get that many tires, and it seems like a lot, but you'll find that you run out very, very quickly. Depending on what's going on, even in super sport, we'll typically between FP1 and Q1, we typically run the same front tire, depending on weather conditions, and that way we can use more rear tires. So typically in Q1, we want to use one front, one rear, and be able to run it. And then this is where things start to get exciting. Q2 or Q1, this is where it starts to count, right? They're, of course, all time sessions, but basically whether you're going to make or break the show starts right here. And the nice thing is what MOTOAMERICA does is that if you make the time cut in any one of your Q sessions, you're in the show. So let's say you make the time cut in Q1, but something happens in Q2, you can still make the show based on whether you fit into that percentage. So that is one nice thing that happens. And typically in Q2, depending on the class, we'll run 2 rear tires. So we'll typically go out on a tire, and whether that's the tire from FP1 or a new tire, we'll go out on that, try to set a time, come back in, think about it, whether we want to make any bike changes, and put on the second tire, and then try to set a lap with that. So by the end of Q1, you should have a pretty solid idea of where you're at and where the bike's at, and what changes that you may or may not want to make. Because again, you're getting, depending on the class, either 20 minute, 25 minute, or 30 minute session, unless you're super bike. That's it. There's no time, right? They're not gonna. You don't get to go up to them and say, "Oh, dude, sorry about that. I was late." They don't care. So you have very little time, and you have to fit into their parameters. So Q2, right? So Q2 is you should have a little bit better idea if you're making any setup changes. You can make the setup changes. Maybe it's gearing. Maybe it's a little bit of a spring change or clicker change. Now's the time to try these things and to see how they work, or even riding technique changes. When you're new to this, there's a lot going on, and typically your pace will come up. So your bike setup might have to change, or something you're doing with your riding might have to change as well. So, and then once you're done with Q2, you're done. And then one thing I should mention is after Q1 and Q2, your bike goes to park for A. So after free practice 1, your bike can come right back to the pit. That's no problem. After Q1 and Q2, your bike goes into motorcycle jail, where they go through it to make sure that your bike has all the right things. Make sure it has your tire stickers on it, right? Because they have to count how many tires you're using. Make sure that the equipment on your bike looks okay, that you're not running anything that's not designated for that class. And typically they'll hold the bike for around 30 minutes. And then they'll release the bike, and you'll be able to pick it up and go back and get it and prep it. Sometimes there's very little time in between, like Q2 and the race, depending on the class. You really have to be on your game here, and having a designated handheld radio that is on the MOTOAMERICA channel is a must. And it's something that you'll be glued to the whole time. MOTOAMERICA does an extremely good job of announcements. So, but you've got to have the radio to make sure that happens. And then as you approach race time, the grids will come out. You'll have the grid, and you'll be able to see where you're at. One thing to remember, you might have, say, a 2 p.m. race start or a 3 p.m. race start or a 3:10 or whatever it is, but you roll typically 15 minutes before that. So you've got to be ready to go. And depending on if it's a quick start or a full start is what you do. If it's a quick start, you roll from the hot pit, and you'll roll out, have somebody meet you on grid. So you do a parade lap, meet you on grid, then they do a warm-up lap, and then you're racing. Where if the full start is you'll do a parade lap, then you'll sit on grid for 7 minutes or whatever it is. So you'll have tire warmers, generators, stands, the whole bit, and then you'll have to remove those. So hauling that stuff from your pit or hot pit, you need more than one person to be able to do that. And then you get to go race. And then after the race, the bike goes back to Parc Fermé again. One note on Parc Fermé or tech is after the race, there's times where you, typically not as a privateer, but it has happened, you may have a note on your bike. They may want to inspect something, and you need to be prepared to do anything, whether it's pulling brake calipers off to check pistons, whether it's safety wiring your rear caliper, or maybe it's checking your airbox, maybe it's checking your fuel, or maybe it's pulling the throttle bodies off to look into the intake ports. You have to be prepared for that as well. So there is a lot to deal with that. So, okay, and after that it's race time, and or you race, and then you've got morning warm up on Sunday, where you can again try some things and race again on Sunday. So depending on the class. So some classes only race once, some of them race twice. So, yes, it's a lot. It is a lot that's going on. And again, I've said how difficult this can be, but it's also incredibly rewarding. And one thing that is you go to a single MOTOAMERICA race or you go to multiple MOTOAMERICA races, how much it raises your riding game as well as your professionalism game. It's a game changer. For your riding and just your overall what you're doing for the sport. So I'm a big fan of having this as a goal. The goal is completely doable. I've taken multiple clients that have been mid-pack, right? They've been mid-pack club racers, and they say, you know what, I'm gonna set a goal. In 2 years, I wanna make a MOTOAMERICA grid. Or in a year, or whatever it might be, depending on where you're at in your riding. And I think that's awesome. I just think that's great. And I think this is just a great goal for everyone to have. So, all right. There it is. All the stuff that takes that off the top of my head or off the top of all of these pages of notes to be able to run with MOTOAMERICA. So I hope to see you out there. Ken Hill Podcast 2021, all rights reserved.